Welcome back to Face the State. I'm Ariana Bennett. Thank you for staying with us. Well, in the last segment, you heard from one candidate for Washoe County Sheriff, Heidi Howe. Now we'll hear from Darin Balaam. Darin, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
No, we appreciate your time. Now, you spent 22 years with Washoe County Sheriff's Office and retired a few years ago?
Yes, I retired in January of 2015.
Now, why make the decision to run for sheriff?
This is something I always wanted to do since I started my career. I was always taught by my parents that you always set goals. So when I started my career back in '93 at the Sheriff's Office, you know, I looked throughout and I set that goal of hopefully at the end of my career, you know, have that opportunity, be prepared to run for sheriff. So I set out over the next 22 years preparing for this moment. And, you know, for me, it's about giving back to this community and making a difference, and hopefully making a difference, leaving this a better place than when we started.
Well, you jumped into the campaigning really early on. I feel like you announced it. It's been almost a year since.
So I announced the same day that the current Sheriff Allen announced he wasn't going to run, because I had been planning this. So like I said, I started knocking on doors and meeting with community members and groups back in 2015, because I knew this is what I wanted. And I knew that if I wanted to go, I had to go out and earn it, and I had to start knocking on those doors and listening. You know, that's important. I think you have to listen to this community just as much as you have to speak to it.
So what major issue drives you? What is the biggest challenge facing the department that you want to fix?
You know, there's several, but I think the biggest thing overall is working with the community to make that difference. Learning how we can, I always said the most important thing of the Sheriff's Office is that protect and serve, it's serving. Going out and asking the community, what do you need? And these are the resources we can bring. Let's address that issue, but then more importantly, once we maybe pull those resources out and move them around in the county, sustain that program. So if we're addressing property crime, how do we work with the community so that once we address it, it doesn't spark back up? So we want to make that difference. So that's one of the things I want to do. And other things within the jail. You know, I think we need to look at how, as we're holding those individuals that are arrested or sentenced to our jail, how do we serve them? Why we have them in our jail, why don't we look at how we can get them back on their feet so when they go back out into the community, they may have the tools so that they don't come back into our facility. And therefore, you know, we don't have that revolving door. Is
the jail then, would you say, the biggest challenge the office faces, or is there something else?
I think mental health total is the biggest problem. So it's within the jail. 80% of our population has some type of mental health issue, but it's in our community as well. So I think it's both outside and inside is the biggest problem of how do we address those individuals outside our community before they end up in our jail, and how do we address those that are in our facility? How can we provide those programs inside? How can we give them the mental health services they need, and then direct them once we release them? Instead of giving them a bus pass like we do now, how about we give them transportation to the nonprofits in our community that are making the difference and get them back on their feet?
So you mentioned, obviously, the recidivism issue is huge. Do you have specific policy proposals you're going to make to help that?
Absolutely. You know, mental health is one of my big pillars: domestic violence, seniors, and then what I call community integration. When you talk about mental health, I've reached out to those nonprofit organizations and looking at how we can bring them into our facility, like I said before, start programming them, start offering those that have addictions and bring those type of services into our facility. And then more importantly, again, when we release them, because what I've seen over my career is we release the individuals after they've served their time, and then we don't give them anything but a bus pass, like I said. So with the city of Reno and everything they're trying to do to improve, and the BID, right now we feed them every day consistently and constantly individuals with a bus pass with nowhere to go. So, you know, the policies that I want to implement is how do we work on that transportation? We get them serviced in the facility while they're there. We give them those programs, and then again we link them to services outside so that when they're released, we can get them there. Because people oftentimes, unfortunately, it's that lower socioeconomic, homeless population. They don't have means of transportation, so they get one bus pass, and then we expect them to get to the VA hospital or Hopes, and it doesn't happen. So they get off their meds, they get rearrested, and then we see them back in our facility.
Right. Now, is there room in the budget to implement these changes, or would you need an augmented budget? You know, the way I look at it is we need to work together. I think there's room initially because we need to partner. You know, my biggest thing, what I've seen in law enforcement throughout this region is sometimes we don't
collaborate with our partners, our sister agencies. So, you know, I've been sitting down with both the Reno and Sparks police chiefs, the council, the commission of, you know, we're all in this together. This entire community, when you talk about crime or any other social issues, it doesn't care about jurisdictional boundaries. So crimes of opportunity, they don't know where Reno and Sparks and Washoe County jurisdictional lines are. So for me, it's about collaborating and bringing everybody to the table. And I think if we do that, we don't need to augment the budget that much initially, but then as we start to expand that, we probably will have to augment it. But at that time, for me as sheriff, the one important thing I like to do is be able to look at the community, the citizens, the commission, whoever I'm addressing and saying, I need more money. And I'm using your resources that you've entrusted to me to the best of my ability. And I'm collaborating with everybody from businesses to citizens to other law enforcement agencies, and we are stretched.
Do you think that you need more deputies, and how do you go about getting those?
So yes, we need more deputies. How we go about doing that is the same way we did it 4 years ago. And what we did was we tracked our statistics. And so that we are able to show the community, show the commission, here's our calls for service, or here's our increase in jail fights or hazards in the jail, and this is why we need more bodies. And back in 14, 15, we were able to get 8 deputies because we showed the commission that, hey, we're utilizing the resources that are entrusted us, we're being fiscally responsible, but yet we're still falling behind because our population's growing. So we're having more inmates come in, so the population in the jail is increasing. We're having more calls for service, and our response time is slowing down out in the facility or out in the community. So that's how working with the commission, again, having that good relationship, utilizing and working with the associations within the office, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to be efficient and effective. And then, as we know, we're growing, and showing those statistics to the community and educating the community, I think, is a key too, to show them here's where we're at and here's where we need your help.
How much change do you think that the office needs, or is it generally heading in the right direction?
You know, I think we need some change when it comes to, I think law enforcement as a whole, we need to change of how we address mental health. As you've noticed over the last couple of years, many sheriffs around the nation are talking about mental health. Before it was we go out and we fight crime and we don't talk about mental health or those social issues. So I think we need to change the directions. They're starting to now, but we need to implement more programs, like I said, diverting those individuals before they come to our jail. Because right now, it costs $126 a day for a healthy inmate on average to be housed in our facility. And I can tell you there's individuals that have fallen through the cracks that have committed nonviolent misdemeanors that would be better served if we were to divert them into other programs in our community and get them back on their feet. And making sure we have the room for the true predators that are out there preying upon our citizens. When it comes to domestic violence, for me, that's a passion. So I want to change the direction and focus on that. Sex trafficking is another big one. We know that's an issue. It was an issue several years ago when I was in the gang unit. 15 years ago, we had that. So we need to work together again with the cities where the more urbanized, and come together and, you know, how are we going to work on that and address it? You know, there's funding mechanisms that were, when you talk about sex trafficking, that were just established in the last session through Assemblywoman Jill Tolles, and the feds are willing. So, you know, those are some of the policies I wanted to address in the community and within the facility.
Okay, really quickly, gun violence obviously is a hot button issue. Do you support universal background checks?
I think what we need to do on universal background checks, yes.
Okay, and then obviously, I mean, you've said this before, very pro Second Amendment in your policies.
Yes, yeah. I believe the Second Amendment, like every other amendment, you know, we need to support that. I think when you look at gun violence, one of the things we also need to look at is, again, that underlying mental health. That's one thing we need to talk about. If you look at all the active shooters, because I teach right now at the college level, and when I'm talking to my students, when we look at that, mental health is always the second underlying issue. And, you know, how do we work with the community to identify those people that are in distress, that are having issues, and, you know, with the red flags and what they're working on right now of how we can get those firearms out of people that may be in distress, that's something we need to look at.
Okay, just taking a look at the platforms between you and your opponent, there's not a really obviously distinguishable difference between the things that you are going for. So how do you set yourself apart? How are you different from your opponent?
So I think it's several things. I think it's experience and education are two of the things, and then dedication and passion. Experience, one thing that sets me apart is I worked as a civilian. I started out as a civilian. So I know the whole civilian side of the sheriff's office. And then I worked throughout the entire sheriff's office. So there's 3 areas: detention, operation, and administration. I worked in all 3, and they all have different functions within the office, but more importantly, how they serve the community. And then more importantly, I worked up to the executive level. So I was in charge of the entire budget, which this year is $119 million. At the time, it was $98 million when I was there, and all 754 employees. So, you know, hiring, firing, recruiting, background investigation, liability, risk management, all of that at the executive level, you're engaged in much more than at the lower levels. Education, I have my master's from the University of Louisville in Criminal Justice Administration. I've been sent to several leadership schools like my opponent, but then I think it goes down to passion, and that's where I started 3.5 years ago because I knew this is exactly what I wanted. I've been training for this, preparing for this my entire career, and again, moving around that office, learning. It's a complex organization. Again, when you talk to the community, many people don't realize how large that budget is. 754 employees, 500 volunteers. It's a very large organization. So I spent the time learning everything about that, and I think that's what sets me apart, and the campaign's going to show that, hopefully.
Okay, well, we have just about 30 seconds left. What's your final message to voters?
What I would ask is please look at both of us, compare us, look at the experience and knowledge, and most importantly, I ask for their support and I ask for their vote. And I appreciate their consideration. All
right, Darin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Well, that is it for this episode of Face the State. But for more information or to see past episodes, you can just head to our website. That's ktvn.com. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you next week.